Today I want to talk about being uncompromising. And this is a delicate thing to talk about because the ego can run away with this. And we're often led to believe that compromise is a good thing. And while it may appear that way, the worst thing you can do is to betray your truth. And so I'd like to talk about what Gandhi called truth force, which is the same thing that Neville Goddard talked about in the law of assumption. So if you feel like you've compromised, listen up. This could be a wonderful lesson in how to set yourself free, which is what truth does. Stick around. Truth force is a powerful tool that pushes open invisible doors. But first you have to notice something that feels not right. You want to call it an opposing circumstance, a difficult person, an oppressive government, whatever seems not right. This is the proverbial stalemate that comes up against us. And Martin Luther King is a very good example of someone who applied truth force. This is a quiet protest against an inherent truth that wants to be known. Meaning that the law is within you. Although the civil law, the national law, the laws that govern our structural life sometimes jet up against that. And Jesus gave us instructions that a lot of Christians don't follow. Of course, it's very good to speak against Jesus' followers because they've become dogmatic. And you see, Jesus did the same thing to the established religion of the time. He criticized it. And so we need to criticize religion and those who follow the letter of the law, not understanding that moral code is embedded and that truth is within. And although it seems like it's evolving, it's not. And so his instruction was to give Caesar what's Caesar's, means pay your taxes. Now here's an example of someone who thought that went against moral law, paying taxes, is Henry David Thoreau, who wanted to live in a shack off the grid on Walden Pond. And so he didn't pay taxes. He thought that was a cruel thing to do to a human being. Yet he was jailed for it because he didn't pay his poll tax or something. I don't know the whole story. But he refused to let anybody help him. He thought the truth would set him free from prison. And it did. One of his relatives paid his tax, and it infuriated him because it turned him into a victim of his own doing. And he didn't want to be saved from that, you see. He wanted the truth to set the record straight, and he would have sat in jail until that prevailed. Nelson Mandela is another person who was like that. Died for their cause. In a manner of speaking. Nelson Mandela was eventually freed after 27 years of being in prison. See, the true martyr is going to die for what's right. And so Martin Luther King died standing up for what was right, but he never carried a gun. It's not a violent thing. So Gandhi also was not violent, and nor was he wealthy. He wouldn't accept money. He didn't want to stand on anything else except these principles which he knew were correct. And so truth force is recognizing the enemy but not turning them into one. And he also said to be the change that you want to see. So in order to be the change that you want to see, you have to notice something needs to be turned around situationally. This isn't right. I don't see what's right. But we have to have a foundation to stand on. You have to know what's right for yourself. And how do we do that? First of all, you have to know that you're being led. In the same way that a flock of birds or a school of fish is led. So then the ego is like, well, who's the leader? Who's the boss of the school of fish or the flock of birds? And that's not how it works. The flock of birds become a singular consciousness, a bunch of particles that behave. You see, this is what's interesting. The universe behaves. Everything in the universe behaves according to a law. Principles. Gravity follows its own law. The speed of light follows its own law. Atoms of a particular object follow the laws of that particular object, which helps us identify them. So it's a pattern of behaviors. And you are a pattern of behaviors that operate on your own law. You're not operating on the 10 Commandments. Most people can't name but 2 or 1 of them. Yet they want to put them in courtrooms and in government buildings. And they don't know anything about it. Most people don't even know what's in the Bible. What you do know is what's in your heart. And when the heart and the mind are in alignment, the Buddha called that citta. Right? I think I'm saying that right. C-I-T-T-A. That's coherence of the mind and the heart. But the mind insists on following something outside of itself. That you can't. You can't follow something outside of yourself. You get to the point where you can't even follow your mind anymore. The mind leads you to nowhere. So the heart is what's propelling you forward, and it seems to propel you right into an obstacle. And sometimes these opposing forces can even seem like our very own circumstances. In Henry David Thoreau's case, his circumstance was he got put in jail because he didn't feel taxes were the right thing to do. Now that's a violation of civil law. He deserved to be in jail. But we can operate silently. You can pay your taxes, but you can protest silently. And somehow progress always wins. You know, there was a point of time where people did not even question the ownership of human beings as property. I'm sure there were people that thought, well, this is kind of weird. But then there were some people who had no clue that owning a human being as a piece of property was morally apprehensible. And it's when you start to get into yourself and say, wait a minute, is this right for me? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Then you are following the primordial instinct that a school of fish follows, a flock of birds follows, or a pack of dogs follows. You're not following the crowd. You see what I'm saying? You're following that indigenous, deep knowing of what's right. And sometimes people follow that and they recognize it takes them into a very dark place, what doesn't seem to be able to be moved. And so rather than girding up your loins and following an army, you simply quietly protest what you see with your eyes. And what you know with your insight, deeply know with your insight to be true, will often defy physical limitations. Can you imagine how impossible in the 50s and 60s it was to think of civil rights as being a thing for those people? Martin Luther King's dream was completely impossible. But he wouldn't give up on it because he knew it was the right thing. He was the change he wanted to see. Nonviolent protest. So, okay, fine. How do we use Gandhi's truth force? The same way Martin Luther King used it against a collective bulwark. How do we take Neville Goddard's law of assumption and use it in our own lives? Well, think about what you feel is stopping you. The mind is the first thing. You can protest what the mind says. You don't fear it and fight it, because that will reinfect it. It's just like if somebody disagrees with you and you keep arguing with them. It escalates. This is a silent rebellion against your mind. Quiet. You might hear yourself, give yourself a thought. You can simply say, thank you for that thought. But that's a habit, not a truth. Thank you for that thought, but that's a compulsion that doesn't apply to me. You see. But you say it silently. You don't say that out loud. And so what this is a quiet noticing of a circumstance that seems to be closing in on you. If you are to run from it, do it. If you were to leave a job or leave a relationship, that's fine. But you also will know in that deep intuitive part of you whether or not you are to breathe life into it, to change it. To change it is to be the change, not to force it. Truth force is an internal shift. The law of assumption is an internal shift where you acknowledge that you may be in a challenge, a deficit, an impossible task, but you know that it is to change. That's where truth force comes in, because the truth will set you free from your own circumstances. But there's a key. You're not a victim of them, nor are you a savior. Thomas Aquinas wrote a hymn called O Salutaris Ostia, which means saving victim, naming Jesus as the saving victim. Funny, isn't it? Saving and victim cancel each other out. When you are not the savior, nor the victim of your circumstance, you'll have joined that school of fish that knows the will of the way, your true direction, the law. That's your guidance system. In order to have a guidance system, you have to have something that jets up against it. That's called fear. Doubt jets up against faith to help us have a direction. That's what the Buddha called the pathless direction. It's going somewhere. The school of fish is going somewhere. We don't know who's leading. What is the singular fish that's leading? No, they are being led by some invisible consciousness greater than the school, greater than the part. The flock of birds is going somewhere. They are following instinct. And who's to say that Gandhi was not talking about instinct, the truth force? You don't need the law to tell you what's right. You do obey as much of the law as you possibly can in a civil, governmental way. Of course you pay your taxes. You do your best, but it's basically the honor system. Most of us are ignorant. The law is so complicated, we can't even imagine how many. My friend's a cop. He says, you break laws every day. But the one thing that you do not break are the simple laws of your spirit. That's non-compromising. Not compromising what you know to be true, even though you might be forced into prison. In a manner of speaking, a little bit of suffering. What does that do? It helps solidify your position. It increases your resolve to be quiet. I know what's right for me. And everybody knows what's right for them. And that's what's called being an independent thinker. And once you understand that, even your very own circumstances which seem to be bullying you around, you will not turn them into the enemy, nor will you turn yourself into the victim, nor will you save yourself. You will rely on that higher consciousness that a school of fish relies on. It's called instinct. And you have it. That's the law. Don't compromise that. That's the foundation upon which you make all decisions. And I don't care how the circumstances seem to be bullying you, or impossible, or there's an army against you. You don't fight it. You don't fear it. You don't flee from it. The truth will set you free if you stand on your own truth, quietly, non-violently, and by being that change you wish to see. Embody that wonderful feeling that it's already changed. And it must conform. It might take a while, but that's what commitment is. Commitment to your own truth, which will set you free from circumstances that seem to be locking you down. My name is Ryan. I hope you enjoyed these insights. Please check out my blog, My Morning Motivator, or one of my books on Amazon, and we will see you next time.